I still remember the exact day my life cracked open and swallowed my childhood whole. I was 10 years old, sitting on the porch steps with scraped knees and sticky fingers from the lemonade I had been drinking. The late summer air was thick and heavy, buzzing with cicadas, and the sky blushed pink as the sun sank low. I thought my parents had called me outside for ice cream, or maybe even a surprise trip to the movies. But instead, they stood in front of me with suitcases in their hands. At first, I didn't understand. I laughed, asked where we were going, if it was a vacation. My mother's eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. My father cleared his throat, that stern expression I had grown used to tightening across his face. "We'll be gone for a while," he said, his voice so clipped and cold it didn't sound like him at all. "A while," I echoed, still smiling, still innocent enough to believe that a while meant a week, maybe two. But then my mother's lips trembled, and for the briefest second I thought she might scoop me up, kiss my forehead, and promise everything would be fine. Instead, she bent down, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, "Be good for your uncle." That was it. No explanation, no promise to return. Just a hurried hug, the faint scent of her perfume lingering as she pulled away, and then the slam of car doors. I chased them to the driveway, barefoot on hot asphalt, my small fists pounding against the air. I screamed their names until my throat burned, until the taillights disappeared and the night swallowed them whole. They didn't look back. The days that followed blurred into one long ache. I waited by the window every evening, convinced their car would appear at any moment. I refused to unpack the small backpack I had hurriedly stuffed with toys ready for the trip I thought we were taking. At school, I lied to my classmates. I said my parents had gone to help relatives far away, but children know when another child is lying, and soon the whispers started, the pitying glances. It was my uncle, my father's younger brother, who saved me from falling into the void. He had always been the quiet man in the corner at family gatherings, the one who laughed more with his eyes than his mouth. When my parents left, he moved into our creaky old house, as if he had been waiting all along for the moment he would be needed. I remember the first night I stayed with him. I couldn't sleep. The sheets smelled wrong. The silence pressed down too heavily. He sat at the edge of my bed, reading me stories in a voice that was deep and steady. He wasn't good at voices or dramatics, but he read every word like it mattered, and that was enough. "You're not alone," he told me. "I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to believe him, but a 10-year-old who has already learned the sting of abandonment doesn't trust words so easily. I nodded, but deep down, I waited for him to vanish too. The wound never really healed. For years, every birthday candle I blew out, every shooting star I wished upon, carried the same silent plea: bring them back. Let them love me again. But as time stretched on, the plea shifted. It turned brittle, then sharp. By the time I turned 15, I no longer wished for their return. I wished for answers, and when no answers came, I began to wish for strength. My uncle became my anchor in those stormy years. He taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, how to ride a bike without wobbling, how to stand tall when others tried to knock me down. He was not perfect, his patience sometimes frayed, his temper sometimes flickered, but he showed up every single day. And in showing up, he filled the silence my parents had left behind. Yet even with his love, the scar of abandonment carved deep into me. It shaped how I trusted, how I loved, how I saw myself. Children who are left behind grow into adults who always wonder if they're worth staying for. That question haunted me long after my parents were gone. Looking back now, I see that moment, my parents' departure, as the root of everything that came after. The loneliness, the resilience, the anger, the hunger to prove myself, and later the storm that would come crashing into my life again when those same people who once drove away in the night returned, not with love, not with apologies, but with greed sharp enough to cut me open all over again. But that part of the story comes later. For now, what you need to understand is this: the wound of abandonment never truly heals. It scabs, it scars, it teaches you to live differently. But in the quiet hours, in the moments when grief creeps in like a shadow, you can still feel it throbbing. You can still hear the sound of car doors slamming, and you can still see the red glow of taillights disappearing into the dark. That is where my story begins. Back, hand index pointing right. Would you like me to continue Chapter 2 in the same expanded style? Or should I make Chapter 1 even longer, more flashbacks, more bond? Building with the uncle, more emotional depth. You said, to ChatGPT said, perfect, let's move on to Chapter 2, a legacy of love, a storm of greed. I'll expand it fully into a long, emotional draft that shows the uncle's passing, the narrator's grief, and the shocking reappearance of the parents. Chapter 2, a legacy of love, a storm of greed. Grief has a strange way of distorting time. The morning my uncle passed, the clocks in the house seemed to stop ticking. The air itself turned heavy, pressing against my chest as though the walls were leaning inward. He had been sick for months, but he'd fought so stubbornly, so quietly, that I half believed he would live forever simply to spite the illness that tried to take him. I was 27 when I held his hand in that sterile hospital room, the faint beeping of machines marking his last breaths. His grip was weak, the skin thin and fragile, yet his eyes, God, his eyes still carried that steady warmth I had leaned on for nearly 2 decades. Don't let them take it from you, he whispered, his voice rasping, barely audible. I frowned, brushing his hair back, too focused on holding him there, keeping him alive with my touch, with my tears. Don't talk like that. You'll be fine, Will. He squeezed my hand with the last of his strength. Promise me. I nodded through sobs, because what else could I do? A promise was the only gift I could give him, as the light in his eyes dimmed. When the final beep flattened into silence, the nurse stepped forward, but all I could do was cling to him, as though sheer willpower could drag him back. The days that followed felt dreamlike. The funeral was small, just a handful of people whose lives my uncle had quietly touched. He was not a man who collected friends easily, but those who knew him spoke of loyalty, kindness, and the fierce way he had protected me when no one else would. When the lawyer read his will, I sat in numb silence. I expected nothing. I had always been grateful simply for his love and sacrifice. But as the words spilled out, I realized he had left me everything. The house we had lived in together. The land he had inherited from his own father. His savings, his investments, his company shares. It was a fortune I had never imagined, nearly 18 million in total. The room went still when the number was spoken, my heart twisted with guilt. I didn't want money, I wanted him back. But at the same time, I felt his presence in that moment, as if he was saying, "This is my final way of protecting you. This is my thank you for staying when others left." I cried again that night, alone in his room, clutching the old sweater he used to wear on chilly evenings. I thought my grief would be the only storm I'd have to weather. I thought his death was the cruelest twist life could give me. But then they came back. It was 3 weeks after the funeral. I had just returned from grocery shopping, bags heavy in my hands, when I saw them standing on the porch. My parents, for a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. They were older, worn down by years, their faces lined, their hair streaked with gray. My mother wore expensive jewelry, her lips painted, her perfume cloying. My father stood taller, but his suit looked too new, as though borrowed to make a good impression. The sight of them hit me like a punch to the chest. I froze, my throat tightening. 2 decades had passed since they abandoned me, and here they were, standing like ghosts summoned from the past. "Sweetheart," my mother said, her voice trembling with fake affection, "we heard about your uncle. We're so sorry for your loss." I dropped the grocery bags, cans clattering against the concrete. My pulse roared in my ears. Sweetheart, she hadn't called me that since I was 10 years old. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat, trembling with barely contained rage. They exchanged a glance, and for the first time I saw it. Not sorrow, not guilt, but calculation. My father cleared his throat, the same way he had the night he abandoned me. "We're your parents. We thought it was time to reconnect, especially after everything." His eyes flickered toward the house behind me. The inheritance, that's when I knew they hadn't come for me. They hadn't come for closure or love or even forgiveness. They had come for what my uncle had left me. A week later, the papers arrived. They weren't just asking for money. They were suing me, suing their own child for $18 million. Their claim was that as my legal parents, they were entitled to control of the estate. I stared at the documents in disbelief, the words blurring as my hands shook. All those years of silence, all the birthdays and milestones they had missed, every tear I had shed over their absence, and the first words I received from them in nearly 2 decades were legal threats. The betrayal cut deeper than the original abandonment. This wasn't just leaving me behind. This was returning only to strip away the one gift of love I had left in this world. But as I sat there, fury and grief colliding in my chest, I remembered my uncle's final words, "Don't let them take it from you." And for the first time in my life, I felt the fire of resolve burning hotter than the pain. They had taken my childhood. They would not take my future. The storm of greed had arrived on my doorstep, and I was ready to fight. Back, hand index pointing right. "Do you want me to continue with Chapter 3? The lawsuit and betrayal reopened next, expanded in the same intense style. "You said," 3 ChatGPT said. "Great, let's dive deep into Chapter 3. The lawsuit and betrayal reopened. This chapter will bring the courtroom tension, old wounds ripped open, and the shocking revelations about why the parents left." Chapter 3, The Lawsuit and Betrayal, reopened the first day in court felt like stepping into a theater where my pain had become the show, and everyone else was just waiting for the curtain to rise. The building loomed tall and sterile, its marble floors echoing under the weight of footsteps and whispered conversations. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, walked beside me, her confidence a shield I desperately needed. She carried herself like someone who had spent her life dismantling liars. I clung to that energy because inside I was trembling. Across the room sat my parents. My mother wore pearls and a tailored suit in pastel pink, as if she were auditioning for the role of a grieving parent. My father sat stiffly, his jaw tight, pretending to be dignified. They looked like strangers wearing my parents' faces, actors who had studied their parts too well. When our eyes met, my mother offered a weak smile. I looked away. Their lawyer stood and began with a speech that twisted the knife deeper. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client's loving parents were tragically separated from their child years ago due to unfortunate circumstances. Now, they only seek what is rightfully theirs. Management of an estate far too large for a young adult to handle responsibly." I clenched my fists under the table. Loving parents, unfortunate circumstances. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tear down their web of lies. But Evelyn touched my arm lightly, a reminder, patience. Let the truth come in its own time. When it was our turn, Evelyn's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "This is not a case about responsibility. This is a case about abandonment. My client was left at the age of 10, abandoned without explanation, without support. For 17 years, these so-called parents made no contact. offered no care, no love, and now, suddenly, with millions on the line, they return. This isn't love, this is greed. Murmurs rippled through the room. My parents shifted uncomfortably, but I saw the cold determination in their eyes. They weren't ashamed. They were just annoyed someone had said it aloud. The days blurred into testimonies, documents, cross-examinations. They painted themselves as victims. My father claimed he had been forced to leave me behind due to financial ruin and complicated business decisions. My mother spoke of her devastation at having to let her brother-in-law raise me. Every word was soaked in false tears. I sat there, numb at first, until Evelyn asked me to testify. I stood, the weight of 2 decades pressing down on me, and faced the jury. My voice trembled at first, but as I spoke, the memories sharpened, steadying me. I was 10, I said. I remember the suitcases. I remember chasing their car barefoot. I remember screaming until my throat bled, and they never looked back. I waited by the window every day, praying they'd come home. They didn't, not for my birthdays, not for holidays, not when I graduated high school, not when I struggled with depression, not when I needed a parent. They were gone until my uncle died, and suddenly I was worth $18 million to them. The courtroom fell into silence. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but I saw her hand shake, not from sorrow, but from fury at being exposed. Then came the revelation that cracked their entire story open. During cross-examination, Evelyn presented documents she had dug up, business records, travel logs, and bank statements. It turned out my parents hadn't been destitute. They hadn't been struggling or unable to care for me. They had been living abroad, luxurious resorts, expensive properties, high-end vacations, all while their child grew up without them. The jury gasped when Evelyn projected photos of them on a cruise ship, champagne glasses raised, dated just weeks after they abandoned me. Unfortunate circumstances. Evelyn's voice dripped with contempt or deliberate choice. My father's face turned crimson. My mother tried to speak, but her lawyer's objection was overruled. The jury had already seen enough. As the trial dragged on, I felt old wounds rip open inside me. Every lie they told was like reliving the night they left. Every fake smile, every manipulative word, reminded me that the people who should have loved me most had treated me as disposable. But with each revelation, each truth Evelyn brought to light, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't a helpless 10-year-old watching taillights fade into the night. I was standing in the light of truth, stronger than they ever imagined I could be. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just a fight for money. This was a fight for my uncle's memory, for every sacrifice he had made. It was a fight for the child I had once been, the one who had waited at the window for love that never came. The lawsuit was tearing me open, but it was also forging me into steel. And soon, my parents would learn that the child they had abandoned had grown into someone they could no longer control or defeat. Backhand index pointing right. Do you want me to go ahead and expand Chapter 4, Sweet Revenge, but not without scars in the same powerful style, to complete the arc? You said? 4 ChatGPT said. All right, here comes the final act. Chapter 4, Sweet Revenge, but not without scars. This is where justice lands, the truth crushes the parents' greed, and the narrator finds closure not through vengeance alone, but by choosing to live with strength and purpose. Chapter 4, Sweet Revenge, but not without scars. The final day of the trial felt different. The air in the courtroom was heavier, sharper, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The jury members sat straighter, pens poised, eyes tired but focused. They had heard weeks of testimony, seen piles of documents, endured endless arguments. Now everything came down to the last few hours. My parents sat across the room, masks of composure plastered onto their faces. My mother clutched her pearl necklace so tightly I thought it might snap. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, sweat beading on his temple. For all their practiced dignity, I could see the cracks spreading. Evelyn rose for her closing argument. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing with confidence. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words carried the weight of every truth we had uncovered. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. She began, "This case is not about money. It is about betrayal. It is about abandonment. It is about parents who chose wealth and pleasure over their own child, and who now, decades later, return not with love, not with apologies, but with a lawsuit demanding $18 million that does not belong to them." She paused, letting her words sink in. My chest tightened, and I could feel the entire courtroom hanging on her voice. My client's uncle raised him, fed him, comforted him, supported him through every heartbreak and every triumph. He was the father his brother chose not to be, and in his will he made his intentions clear. His estate belongs to the one who stood by his side, to the one who never abandoned him, to the one who knew what loyalty meant. Her voice grew sharper. The plaintiffs abandoned their child, and now, after 20 years of silence, they want to reap the rewards of someone else's sacrifice. This is not love. This is greed, and greed, ladies and gentlemen, should not win. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the hum of the air conditioner above us. When the jury filed back in hours later, I held my breath so long my lungs ached. The foreman stood, unfolded a piece of paper, and spoke the words that would change everything. In the matter of Johnson versus Carter, we find in favor of the defendant. I exhaled, trembling, my vision blurred as relief washed through me like a tidal wave. Evelyn squeezed my hand, her smile small but fierce. Across the room, my parents sat frozen. My mother's mouth hung open, her face pale. My father slammed his fist against the table, his composure shattering at last. For the first time in 2 decades, they had no power over me. They had lost, but victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavy. As they stormed out of the courtroom, my heart twisted. A part of me had always carried the child who waited at the window, who prayed for their return. Even after everything, some tiny fragment of that child still longed for love, for apology, for anything that might make the years of abandonment hurt less. It never came, and I realized then, it never would. Justice had been served, but the scars remained. My parents' betrayal wasn't erased by a verdict. The ache of abandonment still pulsed deep inside me. But now it was no longer an open wound. It was a scar, ugly, permanent, but proof that I had survived. Weeks later, I stood in the backyard of my uncle's house, the sun setting the way it had the night my parents left me so many years ago. Only this time, I wasn't a frightened child. I was a grown man holding the keys to everything my uncle had entrusted me with. I thought about revenge, selling everything just to make sure my parents never touched a dime, exposing their lies further, dragging their names through the mud until nothing was left of their reputations. But then I thought of my uncle, a man who lived simply, who loved quietly, who taught me that showing up every day mattered more than promises or excuses. He wouldn't want me to waste my life chasing bitterness, so instead, I made a decision. I took part of the inheritance and set up a foundation in his name, one that helped children who had been abandoned just like me. Children who needed someone to show up for them the way he had shown up for me. Every time I signed the paperwork, every time I visited the shelter, I felt his presence beside me. His legacy lived on, not in the wealth he left behind, but in the lives it now touched. My parents never contacted me again after the trial. I heard rumors that they sold what little they had left and moved to another state, their reputation shattered. Maybe they blamed me. Maybe they told themselves they were the victims, but their absence no longer defined me. I wasn't the child waiting by the window anymore. I wasn't the teenager aching for answers. I was someone my uncle would be proud of. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.